What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and I was looking at some messages in Discord, and I wanted to talk about the struggles of a lot of the quote unquote better teams throughout the world and how they haven't really been performing as well as they were previously. And I think there are a lot of contributing factors to this that people will probably realize some of it, won't realize other parts of it, and then will yell at me when I say other stuff. So let's start in the LPL because this is probably the most severe change that we have. So for context, like going into last season, a lot of people were relatively uncertain about RNG because Xiaohu was moving to the top lane, Krine was the new mid laner, and Gala was transitioning to becoming the full-time AD carry. Like, I think even last split there were points where Betty was playing. So with RNG, the thing that made RNG unique last split was that they were often playing through the top lane when other teams were playing through mid or jungle because of the remnants of the farming jungle meta, which was basically gone for a majority of the last split, and that ultimately turned into the chem tank meta. And the chem tank meta was helpful for champions like Kai'Sa. So Xiaohu would play Jace, Gragas, Gnar, was one of the best, ended up being one of the best top laners on some of the previous patches. And I guess that's one thing to kind of consider is how much does talent fluctuate patch to patch? I would say it doesn't, but how well do players fit within a given meta, and the meta switches up a little bit every patch. And I think that's really probably the biggest thing that's negatively impacting RNG right now. The bad argument around why RNG is playing worse is like people say, oh, they went to MSI, they had to play an MSI, they didn't have time to adapt to the new meta, they didn't have time practicing on the new meta. That's a bunch of garbage. I think that what has happened in reality is more teams are actively playing around top lane because of the new champions that are being introduced into the meta. So there has been a big meta shift since MSI. But the thing that casters and analysts often do is they just assume that the best players, regardless of like the archetypes that they play, are going to continue being the best players. But going into last split, nobody expected RNG to be as good as they were because they fit that last meta so well. So they probably outperformed expectations because of how well they fit into the meta. You have a team like EDG was very similar. Top Esports, who we came into this year thinking they might be one of the best teams in the world. JDG, very good team. FPX, should be able to come back and perform really well. Same thing with Suning because they're coming off of a world's finals. So all of those teams ended up staying around the top of the table. Everything was pretty predictable. Rare Atom took a step forward, Invictus Gaming took a step backwards, and then LNG with the introduction of Tarzan was looking pretty interesting. So with all of those factors coming and the meta shift that we got, we went from RNG being like a middle or lower end, not lower end team, but like a mid-tier team with a lot of talent to becoming one of the best teams because they fit the meta really well. Now that Gwen and Viego are in the meta, more teams have played around their top laner, giving more resources to top laners. It's more difficult for Xiaohu, I think, to create a competitive laning advantage because a lot of the times he would win top lane really hard through champions that weren't necessarily carries themselves. Like Jace is a carry champion. You can bully in the laning phase and then like be really good as time goes on. But now if you give Xiaohu like Gwen or Viego, it's a priority pick. So you're not necessarily counterpicking. You're just picking a really good champion, and the other team is probably getting a counterpick more often. I don't have stats to back any of that up, but it just seems like a reasonable way to look at the drafting because even if... I mean, I think that's pretty just straightforward. And then in the jungle, we had a chem tank meta that really limited a lot of junglers in terms of how much of a difference they could make relative to other junglers. Now we're in a spot where playmaking junglers have things like champions like Diana, Xin Zhao, Rumble to some extent doesn't have as much playmaking ability, but can get extremely far ahead and like just dominate a game. But it is, in my opinion, like a fundamentally different way to play the game. Like, yes, junglers are still important, but we've gone through some tremendous jungle shifts in the past year and a half. Like, we went from traditional jungling to the farm heavy jungling to the chem tank jungling with heavy farmers, and now we're in a spot where it's more playmaking and increasing the bloodiness of the meta, which is really fun to watch. I mean, a lot of the games that we've gotten recently have been super explosive. A lot of teams, not a lot, but the games that go back and forth, it seems like it's happening more often now, which is a good thing probably for the health of the game and the number of champions that are being played. But with all of those changes happening, I think the biggest question mark, people are saying it's Cryan, but in reality it's probably Gala, because Gala during like MSI and all these international tournaments was 12-4 as Kai'Sa, and now Kai'Sa is often banned against them, or it just doesn't fit into their draft because Kai'Sa isn't as good in the current ecosystem of champions that's out there. Like, if you're just blindly picking Kai'Sa a lot of the time, you're going to get punished by the other team playing Varus. So you see like Ezreal Kai'Sa a decent amount. I think that's fine for Kai'Sa, but now that Varus is back, he's a lane bully. He can really do a lot of damage, literally and figuratively, to Kai'Sa in the laning phase. So that's just one thing to consider for them. The other teams that are struggling right now is Invictus Gaming. Invictus Gaming hasn't had the Shy, which is a big problem. I expect them to do better as time goes on. Suning has been underperforming. I don't think it's really as much like the loss of Sword Art. I think it's more SFM hasn't really been playing that well on this patch, and the meta that Suning performed extremely well on was the hyper carry meta. So once we get back to that hyper carry meta, I would expect Suning to still play really well. It's going to take some time to get there. And Suning beat RNG today, which is a good win, even though RNG has not been playing as well. It's still a good win. BLG is a team that I'm really high on. I'm not sure if this meta is the best for them. They've had a pretty tough schedule, I think, so far. Some losses that are kind of head scratchers, but overall, as time moves on, I think the Zika aiming combination is going to be very good. Team World Elite is a team that a lot of people were looking to take another step forward after their success in the spring. They're doing okay so far right now, but there's been a lot of parity, like a lot of close matches, a lot of upsets and stuff like that. And I think that's another reason why that's happened is because of the introduction of champions like Gwen and Viego. There are so many champions that just can turn the game on its head. And if you want the Gwen and Viego to be in the game and you swap them, like either champion has the opportunity to like just completely steamroll the game. JDG 4-3. I think that they've had, a bad loss or two so far, but ultimately I think that this is going to be a very good meta for them. They have some problems with like the AD carry position right now, which is funny because like last year people were saying like, oh, Loken is so good. I never really thought Loken and Yagao were that good. And now we're kind of seeing that. Like there's fractures in their team. Like they've considered switching out 80 carries, where if Loken was one of the best 80 carries in the world, they wouldn't be doing that. Kanavi is not in a great spot in the meta. Like I think if we do still see very good performances from Kanavi, but we need like Rek'Sai back. I think that'll be a big help. And also Zoom is more of a tank player, so we want the meta to shift back towards tanks so that Zoom doesn't have to be on like Gwen or Viego duty. He can do something that is like playing for Kanavi and then transitioning into late game team fights. That's probably going to be better for them. Top Esports, still very powerful. They had a good win today over EDG because like their talent is still super good. LGD has been pretty good. Shadow has been very good. I think that, I've said it a million times. Mad Lions, whether or not you have El Yoya, I think you have to feel kind of silly that you got rid of Shadow, considering how good he's been in the LPL, which is a stronger league overall. OMG has made a big step forward with a lot of their new players. Cream has been playing very well. Aki, who's like the crazy eye guy, he's played surprisingly well, I think. And then you have like Abel. Abel's played well. FPX, always a strong team. Nobody's surprised that they're up there. Rare Atom played really well for a lot of the spring split. Fell back in the Chem Tank meta, and now they're moving forward again. And that I think that has a lot to do with Leon, because Leon is better in this type of meta, where it's like more volatile junglers. Leon was like rose to prominence during the Kiana jungle meta, which that's one thing that's surprising to me, is when you have teams like pick up junglers that are very good in a specific meta, a lot of the time that doesn't translate into other jungle metas. So you have to be very careful, like when you're picking up new players, make sure that they're not just going insane because of the meta that they're in. And then LNG, this is kind of what I was hoping for last season when Tarzan came in. I wanted LNG to be very good. Icon has played really well this split. Light has played well this split. Ale has been the kind of the surprise for LNG, which I think has made them so much better. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, if a team was looking for a top laner and they think to themselves, oh, we should get Ale because he played or Ale, I don't know how you say his name. Like, he played so well during the spring split for LNG. The problem is that this is the perfect type of meta for top laners to shine if you're on a winning team. Like, you're just going to look you're going to look better artificially, I think. So that's one player I'd be kind of careful with moving forward. And then EDG has been very good, and I think Scout is a flexible player, has been playing a million different champions forever. Viper, very flexible player, has been playing a million different type of champions forever. So I think the core of their team is very solid, and they're going to be meta resilient. I still think that other teams in the region are better, depending on which meta we go into. Like, if we go into a hyperscaling meta, that's probably not going to be great for top esports. It's probably not going to be great for FPX. So EDG could be in a really good spot, actually, moving forward, because if you're looking just at 80 carry strength in the upcoming meta, like, I'm not convinced that Light is that good. I don't personally like iBoy that much. It's possible, but I just don't like him that much. LWX has been very bad recently. Abel, I don't know enough about Abel. Definitely not Kramer. Jackie Love, very good player, but not really the hyper scaling player. Like, he has pop-off performances, but he's not the best Jinx in the world or anything like that. So that's concerning for top esports. I would still think that top esports has a good chance, because when we get into the hyperscale meta, you either have to be very good at the hyperscale meta, or you have to be able to punish it a lot early in the game, which that's why FPX is good a lot of the time, is because they have ways to abuse that. World Elite could get there, I guess, with Elk. Aiming's really good on BLG. Suning's Huanfeng is very good. So I guess that's an interesting way to think about it. Like, I guess you're kind of hoping that it goes into a hyper carry meta, and if it does, you have some spots where you could kind of take shots on a team like OMG, a team like World Elite, BLG, Suning. Like, maybe one of them makes a run in the playoffs because of their proficiency at the hyper carry meta. So for the LPL specifically, I think that it's, if we go back to the original question, like, why are the good teams playing poorly? I think it's a little bit unfair to ask the question that way because of, like, RNG taking a step backwards. I think RNG, you can contribute a lot of their problems to the meta specifically, and like overhyping their performance from the spring and MSI. It could just be that Wei is not as good as people think, Cryan is not as good as people think, Gal is not as good as people think, and the last meta was a perfect storm for them. It's going to require a lot for them to make a comeback in the second half of the season, to not only get in the playoffs, but to make a run in the playoffs. And it seems unlikely to me that the upcoming metas are going to be good for RNG. So that sucks, but I think that's kind of just where we're at. Invictus Gaming, they haven't had the Shy. They've had some question marks in the bot lane. So, like, are they playing worse than they normally were? Yes, but they're big names in China. And I think that's a big reason why people, like, talk about them so much, which is understandable. But the other teams, like EDG, FPX, Top Esports, JDG. Those were four of the teams that we also consider very good teams, and they're not underperforming in the same way. It's not like we have a ton of random teams at the top of the table and all the other teams are gone. I think that as time moves on, the talent of Top Esports, FPX, EDG, JDG are going to get them coming up to the top of the table again, which is going to require LNG, Rare Atom, OMG to take a little bit of a step backwards. Nothing crazy, but just a little bit. So that's enough for the LPL. I'll check in again on that in a couple of weeks. Let's take a look at the LCK. So I guess it's looked more and more like what we expected as time has gone on, because Damwon Gaming, one of the most talented teams in the world, the reigning world champions, they had a lot of bad matches. They made some changes with their roster. They were playing Malrong a decent amount in the jungle, and then moving Canyon to mid lane, and moving Showmaker to AD carry, which is kind of bizarre. I haven't watched as much LCK as I normally do, just because of work and everything like that, but Gen.G still at the top of the table, Damwon Gaming still at the top of the table. Homolife has taken a pretty big step back, but they're 3-5, so they're only 2 games out of second place. I think that you could easily see them make a charge. They had a good match today. Homolife beat Nongshim. So, I mean, not that good of a win, but that was an easy spot. I was on Homolife today. T1 has been mediocre so far, but I expect that to change. DRX had a really good split last split because they fit into the meta very well. Like, Piosik was one of the first Udyr players, and that's gone now. So it's a lot more difficult for them to play. Peanut has played very well in this new split, so they're playing at a very high level. Gory's also looked pretty good, and they're really the core of that team. KT Rollster is about the same. Sandbox has played well. I don't expect that to continue personally. That's why it's important to have opinions on how talented these teams are, because ultimately you would expect it to kind of level off. So in the second half of the season, I expect Hanwha Life to keep trending in the right direction, T1 to keep trending in the right direction, and then Sandbox and Afrika Freaks both falling backwards. Nongshim probably staying about where they are now. But I would expect one of these 3 teams to fall out of the playoffs and Hanwha Life to sneak into the playoffs. That's really it. With Hanwha Life, they've always had question marks around top and jungle. You have Deft and Chovy, which are 2 of the better players in the region. Deft might be, cooked. I don't watch enough Deft to know that that's the case. It could just be they don't fit really well in the meta right now. But Deft's another player that I don't necessarily think is going to be the best Aphelios, the best Jinx. It's more of an Ezreal player. So, who knows? Maybe Hanwha Life won't be able to make a charge in the second half of the split, but I would assume that they can. That's basically that. If we assume that it's going to be a hypercarry meta, Gen.G has a chance. But, I just don't believe in Sandbox or Afrika Freaks. So that's enough for the LCK. The LEC is another region where we've had underperforming top teams. So G2 has been pretty bad so far this split. Caps hasn't looked good. They threw away another game yesterday. Wonder... have they even been playing Viego and Gwen? I think Yonkos is probably... This is probably one of Yonkos' last splits. I think that whether or not you think he is the reason why they're having problems right now, I think that you kind of have to say that they should have grabbed Selfmade in the offseason. So we don't see... Okay, Gwen, Viego. So they have been getting Viego, and they've been generally winning. Just a bad weekend, lose 3 in a row. So maybe this is the peak of us thinking that G2 is bad. I'm the kind of guy who I'm never going to leave. I'm never going to stop playing G2. So this doesn't really bother me so much. As time goes on, I think that Reckless and Mickey... if we get into a hypercarry meta, that's good for Caps. It's good for Reckless. I wonder how that would impact their drafting. Like, what if G2 just went around banning out Gwen Viego and forcing everyone to play other champions? I think that's probably for the best. I'm not afraid of G2 being bad. Vitality's been underperforming. Misfits has been overperforming a little bit, I think. A talented team overall. Mad Lions is another team people are bringing up about, like, you know, why are the top teams playing so poorly? But Rogue has been consistent. I guess it might just be the bloodier teams, like teams that are dependent on these early game team fights going out of control. Maybe that's where having like an abundance of champions to play in top lane, in jungle, maybe that's what's causing all of the insanity. Fnatic has been surprisingly good. Not surprisingly good. Yeah, I guess they have been surprisingly good. The fact that Bwipo has transitioned seamlessly into the jungle is pretty nice. Not completely surprising because Bwipo is always a very intelligent player. But you know, they basically just had to prove it. Astralis, XL, G2, Vitality are all in a clump right now. I expect XL to fall backwards. Like the new players that came in, Marcoon and Advienne. I think that maybe it makes them more competitive against the middle teams, but I don't expect them to stay in the playoff picture. I would think that G2 and Vitality end up taking the 5 and 6 spots, which would make it a very fun playoffs. So I'm not concerned. Again, I think that I personally believe in the talent of teams like G2 and to a lesser extent Vitality. I do believe in Mad Lions. So I would expect this to stay relatively the same. And then once you get like Mad Lions against Misfits in the playoffs or something, I would just go against Misfits. So there's that. And then last up we have the LCS. So 100 Thieves playing better. Not very surprising. Very talented team. The introduction of Abadage, I think everybody kind of expected them to be better because of it. Cloud9, even with their bad record in the summer at 8 and 6, they're still one of the best. They're still one of the best teams, if not the best team in the LCS. Personally, I think they're the best team with the highest upside. I know 100 Thieves has looked better than them recently, but once we get into a playoff series where it's C9 against 100 Thieves, I'll be on C9 and won't think twice about it. TSM has had a good summer, but I think just with the eye test, you can kind of tell that C9 and 100 Thieves are better than them. The question is really like Team Liquid against TSM, and I think stylistically TL is better than TSM, but I would prefer to play the TSM side in that matchup because you're going to get them as an underdog in a spot where they should be able to create an upset. That's really it. I mean, the like, are the good teams bad question would have been more applicable to the LCS, like, you know, a week ago when C9 was struggling more. But now that Perks can see the screen again, it looks like they're just back to being one of the best teams around. Well, in the LCS. So that's basically it. I just wanted to kind of tackle that question, mostly from the LPL perspective. I think that RNG, their struggles, it's less like, oh my god, they're all bad now, and it's more like, were they ever as good as we thought they were, or were they just extremely good on that previous patch and that in that previous meta? I think that's probably the situation we're in, because, you know, I didn't think that Cryan was a world-class mid laner going into last split. I didn't think that Gala was a world-class AD carry going into last split. They had a lot of great performances during the last meta, but, you know, is that reproducible now? Could they become it again? Maybe, but it's going to be tough to feel good about them for a couple of weeks. So that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.